Hello and welcome to the Momentum Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Dallin Malm. This podcast features conversations with athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs who use their success and influence to serve a purpose greater than themselves. My guest today was a standout athlete in Idaho. He earned the state's Gatorade Player of the Year award, a state championship, and a full-ride scholarship to play basketball at Utah State. Before his college athletic career, he served a 2-year service mission for his church, and fortunately, he came back from that taller, stronger, and ready to compete. He carved out a gritty athletic career in Logan, and it culminated in what was supposed to be his showcase senior year, only to end with an early season foot injury. But what makes his story interesting is what came next. You see, his injury gave him the opportunity to reinvent himself. It's a concept that you'll notice many times throughout his life. After basketball, he started a professional career in wealth management, and he quickly rose to become one of the top producers in that industry. Today, he's the regional director and partner in EP Wealth Advisors, where he personally manages a book of assets worth close to $1 billion. The discipline that he learned from athletics and early on in his career has carried over into many other accomplishments in his life, such as becoming a champion bodybuilder and a world-class hunter. Fun fact, he's one of the few hunters who holds a Grand Slam title for North American wild sheep. The through line of his life isn't attention or reinvention for its own sake. It's work, faith, and a willingness to keep moving when the plan changes. In our conversation today, we talk about the pressure and blessing of how he was raised, what sports taught him about effort, and why his church service mission changed the way that he sees grind and sacrifice, and how that foot injury I referenced that felt devastating at the time became one of the greatest blessings of his life. We also touch on parenting and how he teaches the lessons that he learned the hard way to his children so that they don't have to learn it in the same manner. The lesson that keeps resurfacing across every chapter of his life is this. It's that the deepest fulfillment doesn't come from titles or recognition, but simply from loving people and making a real difference in their lives. Please enjoy my conversation with Brady Jardine.
You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word. Victory! Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. For without victory, there can be no survival.
Have you ever read anything from Robert Greene before, the 48 Laws of Power or Mastery or anything like that?
I don't know that I have, no.
He's really prolific. He has these books that are super well researched and interesting, and there's some of his books are like the 48 Laws of Power and the Laws of Seduction and the Laws of War and Mastery, and really interesting books. They're all bestsellers. He's kind of a popular author right now. One of the things that he writes about in the 48 Laws of Power, I think it's law number 25, and he says that one of the ways to maintain or to gain power is to constantly recreate yourself. And what's interesting is one of the people who was like a student of Robert Greene, this author, that's not really well known as Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson was like a huge reader of this guy, and when he died in his estate, he had a copy of his book, specifically the 48 Laws of Power, that had been totally worn down, and he read that like crazy. And what's interesting is you read some of those and you see how he applied a lot of them in his life, but specifically Rule 25, recreate yourself. And Michael, like he literally did that surgically, but throughout his career as the head of the Jackson 5, the main singer, and then going into his own career and then being an icon and coming out with different styles, he was being kind of relevant throughout his entire career, right up until his death. That's like an abstract example of that, but it helps illustrate the principle. I feel like you're a good example of that too. Thankfully, in a lot of different ways,
Yeah, I'm not sure how much like Michael Jackson I am, but I do kind of recreate myself or recreate my passions, maybe more than some.
Yeah.
I've been known to do that.
So I want to get into a lot of this, but just as broad strokes for people who don't know you, there's a time in your life where you grow up and athletics are a big part of your life. You're a standout athlete in the state of Idaho. You go and you serve a 2-year mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in San Antonio, right?
I did, yep.
And then you come back, you play basketball for Utah State. Your senior year is cut short, and so you pivot again, and you're now into the career that you're in now, which is wealth advising. But in between that career, there's things like hunting, and there's once in a lifetime type accomplishments in that hunting sphere, and then there's bodybuilding, and then there's the creation of some of this media stuff that you've done with your family. And everywhere you turn, there's all these different things where you have quote unquote recreated yourself.
Sure.
Not for the purpose of, I don't think for you it was for the purpose of like being relevant or getting attention, but the effect is still the same. Like, it's really interesting. As you look back to your childhood and we kind of lay the foundation of where all this came from, what can you tell me about your parents, the way you were raised and the home you were raised in?
Yeah, I was very, very blessed growing up. I grew up in Twin Falls, Idaho. In today's world, I had a mom and a dad married in the home at the same time. I know that that's kind of something we all hope to have, and in many people's lives, they weren't able to have that for whatever reason, but I was, and that was such an incredible blessing for me. My mom and my dad were both and are both incredible people. They're both very different in kind of what I would say their strengths or maybe weaknesses are. They're different in how they, teach and promote and kind of, helped us as kids to grow. And I've thought a lot about what my parents have done to be, a blessing and a guide for me now that we have 4 of our own young kids, right? And we're trying to navigate. You hear people say this, parents, when things aren't going well, may say, well, I don't have a manual on, to learn what to do. I'm learning this as I go. And There's so much truth to that. Like you would think that having grown up in a home and watching your parents raise you, you'd have a pretty good idea. But man, you get your own kids and it's just like trying to reinvent who you are and what you're doing. And I look back to my parents and, my mom is one of the most incredible examples to me of just straight out hard work. Growing up, my dad, he worked in the computer industry and he bounced around from a couple different jobs. At one point, he was trying to, with a couple of partners, run his own business. And I can remember the stresses as they were trying to get that business go and as they were trying to find a way to be profitable and to make money and to provide for their families. And I remember really late nights. I mean, frankly, I think I hate computers. I have very little computer knowledge and background. I don't like dealing with them. And I think it's partly because my dad was so good at it. But I remember being little and going with my dad late at night where he was trying to do some type of a server update or a software update for a bank or for a business. And we'd be there till 1 or 2 in the morning and he was stressed and trying to get things to work. And I remember watching him work. And I really remember as he was trying to make that happen for our family, things were still tight. And raising 4 kids, I'm the oldest of 4, and we were involved in sports and activities and church and all those things, and it all comes with a cost, a physical cost. And I remember there was a lot of stress at times between my parents and their relationship and just trying to make it happen. And so my mom, as my dad was grinding, trying to figure out a way to get his business to go, I remember she worked for a company that she would make these little packets, and I can't even remember what they were used for, but they were like educational art type packets that were put together and then sent off for some education purpose. But I remember going to bed late at night and my mom would be out there working for $10 an hour putting these packets together after she had run our family for the day and got the kids where they needed to go and made sure we had our meals, made sure we had all of that. And I'd wake up in the morning and I remember looking at her and seeing that she was there doing it again. And I remember wondering at times if she'd ever gone to sleep. And I think there were times that she didn't. And, watching my parents sacrifice and give and struggle to be able to provide for us. I didn't grow up in a home where we got to go on big extravagant vacations. Our family was, when the money was available or when we could do it, it was sporting events because that's what we did. And so, I didn't grow up in a home with maybe super nice fancy cars or boats or toys or big family vacations, but I grew up in a home where we were safe, where we were taught, We were taught to work. We were taught to be good people. We were taught gospel principles on how to follow Christ. And, I look back to my parents, and my parents, as imperfect as they are, because we all are, they sacrificed and did everything that they could to help us be successful and to put us on the right track or the right foundation. My dad, I remember being little, and he'd come home. I say little, like this is, junior high, even high school. He'd come home. He's like, how was practice? Because I always playing sports. It was important to me. And I said, oh, practice was good. And he goes, well, what'd you do after? And I came to know really quick what he meant was, what additional effort did I put in? Did I stay for an hour later and do more conditioning or more shooting or whatever it was? And my dad would always say things like, everyone went to practice. You got to do something more to be better. And it's just those types of lessons, that my dad and my mom taught me, watching them both in word and deed, struggle and sacrifice and fight and get through hard times and work through the good times. And they set me up in a scenario where I knew what it would take to find success because I watched them. And I ended up going on my mission. As I went on my mission, it was really fun to see kind of the blessings of heaven open up for my parents after years of sacrifice. And they both got new jobs and new careers, and in the last 20 years have been very, very successful. And I am grateful being the oldest, getting to see the hurt and the struggle when things weren't good, so that I know what it took for them to get to where things are now great. My younger siblings didn't get to see or maybe remember some of those hard, challenging times, and so it's a little bit more difficult maybe for them to be able to recognize what it took to get to where they are now. But I got to see that. And so that's been one of the greatest blessings of my life, is seeing my parents go through the ups and downs and challenges of building something, teaching us faith, teaching us to do what's good, and then ultimately seeing the blessings that come after a lot of hard work.
So what's the difference then between what your parents taught you and the lifestyle they could afford to give you at the time, which certainly is not the same as the lifestyle you're able to give your children at this time, right? Mm-hmm. Thankfully and fortunately, you've been very blessed. Mm-hmm. And your kids don't have to grow up learning those same lessons, at least through their own experience. So how are you going to teach those same lessons, or at least those same principles, so that your kids learn the things that they need to learn, namely hard work and gratitude, and learning how to live according to their needs rather than according to their wants? Does that make sense?
100%. And I don't know the answer to it. My wife and I talk about it a lot. I mean, frankly, a lot of my success and motivation in being successful came from the anxiety that I felt watching my parents struggle and watching the friction that could happen at times between their marriage, because things were always tight and things were tough. And I'm not trying to make it sound like we didn't have a great growing up. We did, and my parents are incredible people, but that's why I love them, because it wasn't easy. And they just did what they had to do to provide a great life for us as kids. And, you mentioned my kids don't have to go through that, but I find it fascinating. I deal in wealth, and I deal with clients that have some money to clients that have more money than they could ever spend. And what I find is wealth, or the lack thereof, it's all a trial. It's just a different trial. And I look at my kids right now, and my wife and I talk about it. I mean, for spring break, what do? We hop on a plane. We fly our whole family to San Francisco. We spend 6 days down there. We eat at nice restaurants. We do fun things. And to my kids, that's normal.
Yeah.
Well, as a parent, you look at that and like, oh, good, I'm helping my kids maybe avoid some of the stress or heartache, or get to do some of these cool things that I couldn't do when I was little. I don't know that that's a positive. What I learn more and more every day in life is that the trial and the challenge is where growth comes. And so, and that's where the blessings happen, in working and in earning and in feeling like you're making a positive impact and accomplishing things. And so for our kids, my wife and I talk, like, my wife and I have never had a fight over finance. We've had fights over plenty of other things, but not finance. That's not been one of them. Why? Because from the day I started working, I made it possible, and my wife allowed me to make it possible to not have money be an issue, to at least pay our daily bills, or to pay, a medical procedure, those things that come up. So my kids have never seen a fight over finance, with the exception of, you spend too much money hunting, and that's a conversation for another day, and probably true. But we talk about, where our kids don't get to see the struggle and don't get to see what it took to get to where we are, They live in a nice house. They ride around in nice cars. They've been on more airplane rides now than I've been in my entire life, probably still. And so, it's what do we do or how do we teach them? So my wife has been incredible at this. She's better at it than me. She's helped each of our older kids. They've started their own business. And they're doing things that they're actually making product. They're putting together business plans. They're making money. They're saving money because we want them to feel the struggle that it takes to earn a dollar and to earn that success. Because on their day-to-day life, they haven't had to see us go through that. By the time they were born, money wasn't a stress.
Yeah. It's funny because I'm thinking through the same thing with my kids, where my oldest is only 4 years old. He's really smart. He's really bright. And he's developed very fast cognitively. And so I think there's things within his ability where I could challenge him on a different level than I could maybe another kid at that age. One of them, for example, is he has grasped the concept that money buys things. And he gets really excited and he'll ask, can we go to the store? Can we go buy a toy? Or can we go? Now he knows about the dollar store. And he's like, can we go to the dollar store? Because I can get a lot of toys for, whatever. And I told him, I'm in door to door, and so I'm like, buddy, let's make cookies. You have to help, and you have to clean up. Let's put them in bags, and then let's go door to door, and you have to do the talking, but Daddy will come with you, And he's really excited about that. So we've been practicing his sales pitch every night. How is he going to introduce himself? How is he going to sell it? And then how is he going to assume the sale? He's only like 4 years old, and he's
awesome. That's good stuff.
So we're going to go out one of these Saturdays and make him $20 or something. So you got to tell me more about these businesses your kids are doing. Tell me more about those.
Yeah, so it's awesome. And again, my wife has been the catalyst of this. Our oldest daughter, Grace, she's 12. She's now I think this will be her third summer. They've turned into farmers market kids.
Nice.
So they have tables at the farmers market. And what my oldest daughter has done is she has a business called Greetings by Gray. And they get fresh flowers or wild flowers, or they will buy pressed flowers, depending. But ultimately what she's doing is she's making greeting cards with real flowers. So she'll get the pressed flowers or press them herself. She'll pick the flowers. She'll lay them out on the cards. She'll glue them nicely on the cards. And then she's got a nice little, overall package that she puts together. She goes and sells at the farmer's market. And she's been doing that now for a few years, and it's been really fun to watch her. Like, you start talking about learning skills and learning attributes. It's scary for a kid to stand behind a table and have somebody look at their product and then ask them questions that they then have to answer and answer well and answer professionally. And, Gray's gone from standing behind a table passively at the first, the start of this, to now people walk by and she recognizes them as previous clients. She might chase them down and say, hey, did you enjoy the cards? I've got more for sale. Like, just watching her kind of blossom into feeling confident in speaking with people and feeling excited about growing her business. And just in the last month, she's actually gone door to door to several businesses in town. Like Temptation Cupcakes here in town has been awesome to her, and a couple of others. She now has her cards for sale in some of the local businesses.
No way.
So kind of cool stuff. It's not big money, but every once in a while my wife will get a Venmo for 10 or 15 or $20 because one of those businesses sold some cards. And so we've taught them we're trying to teach, Gray in that example, how to run a business, how to earn money. Tess is similar. She's our 10-year-old daughter. She makes homemade dog and cat treats, and I hate it because we get to cook them in our house, and I don't like it. But she makes fresh homemade dog and cat treats, and it's really interesting to watch how different kids are. My oldest daughter, Gray, is always confident, is always comfortable, has always had lots of friends. My second daughter, Tess, is much more reserved, but has a ton of spunk. It's just harder to get it out of her. For a while, she had a harder time making friends, but it's really interesting to watch her. I think we could have pigeonholed her to, oh, she's shy, or, oh, she's, whatever. But in the last couple summers of this farmer's market, she was really nervous to talk to people. And last summer, it got to a point where people would walk by with a dog and they wouldn't stop and look at her table. And so I'd kind of kick her and say, hey, go chase that person down and ask them if you can give them a sample of your dog treats and see if they like it. And she was scared to do it, but then she started doing it. And now we can't ever find Tess at the farmer's market because she just runs around the whole place with her dog treats, giving people samples and then bringing them back to the table to buy it. And so it's just really fun, watching kids with their different attributes learn the same overall lesson, but differently. And grain tests are very different. We've got a son, Callahan, and a youngest daughter, Quinn, which they're not doing their businesses yet. Cal's actually starting one. His idea is the Play-Doh bro. So he's going to make homemade Play-Doh, and he's going to 3D print a bunch of like cutouts and things to use for Play-Doh. That's what he's going to do. But it's kind of fun to see, like my oldest daughter, Gray, in the last 3 years, she has saved. She has an investment account with the firm just because we're helping her save.
That's awesome.
You know, she's got $4,500 that she's saved and invested in her little investment account.
And she's how old?
She's 12.
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, and so, and she's proud of it. And it's fun to watch her as that account grows, and every once in a while she'll ask me to pull it up on the app on my phone so she can see, because it's invested. Well, did it make money or lose money? It's been lots of conversations that way. But now it's like, well, instead of wanting to blow the $50 I made today, I want to save it and invest it because I want to see that number keep getting bigger. A couple nights ago, she's getting to the point where all of her friends have cell phones, and we have some very strong opinions there about what we're going to and not do there. But I just made the comment to Gray. I said, hey, this is the deal. When you get $10,000 saved in your investment account, we'll get you some type of a dumb phone or some type of a phone, right? Not a smartphone.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, so I just have to save 10 grand and I can get a phone? Yep. If you do it this summer, we'll buy you one this summer. If it takes you 5 years, that's not my problem. So we've now got a requirement for her that if she wants to get a phone, she has to have 10 grand saved in her account. And we just feel like, you know, she's now motivated. She now wants to save. Because if she makes money and spends money, she's not getting closer to getting a phone, right? So it's just fun to watch them. Again, we don't know what we're doing. We're doing our best. Like, and there's days we look at each other like, I don't know what the crap, we're screwing these kids up so bad. But it's fun to watch them grow and learn. You
haven't taught them about taxes yet?
We do, actually. And the way I teach them about taxes is candy. So they get a treat that they like, and the first thing I do is I walk by and I take a third of it. And they're like, what do you do? And I said, taxes. And at first they're like, what is taxes? And so we talk to them about tax and what it is and the joy it is to pay tax.
Wait till they learn that a third is actually pretty good.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I haven't gotten mean enough to take half yet, but now I walk by and they see me with their thing of candy and they say taxes and they just dump it out and give it to me. So we're teaching them taxes through their candy consumption.
That's awesome. That's where it hits home right now.
It does. That's what connects with them.
Another cool thing about this is, as you're a parent, you get to adapt these lessons to where your children are. And I like how you talk about challenges matter. And what I take from that is you don't necessarily need to put them back where you were. You don't need to put them in a life where they're living a lower standard of life than you could reasonably afford to give them now. But you are challenging them where they're at. You're meeting them where they're at.
Yep. And
challenging them to grow from there. What's unique about this is there's a lot of unique challenges that you have the opportunity to teach them about that really make you who you are. For example, I think there's several of them, but one of them early on was you were the standout basketball player in the state of Idaho. You won a state-recognized award your senior year, and you won a state championship that year, didn't you?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
It was like the first one for your school in like 30 years or something like that.
32 years, I think, yeah.
32 years.
Yeah.
That had to have felt pretty good.
It was awesome.
And then you sign a letter of intent to Utah State. You go and you serve a mission. So you're 19 years old at the time. What was that like, the transition? Was it a no-brainer for you, or was that a hard decision to leave?
That's a great question. For a long time, it was an easy decision until it wasn't. And growing up, I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I knew I wanted to serve a mission. That's what I was taught. You know, go on a mission. I'm going to go on a mission. And I was going to do that. And then, I was like a real late bloomer physically. I wasn't big. I wasn't strong. As a freshman in high school, I was 5'9". As a sophomore, I was 6 foot. As a junior, I was 6'4". As a senior, I was 6'6". And I loved basketball, and I was always a decent player, a pretty good player, but I just didn't have the size to be desirable on the next level. And so it's easy to say I'm going on a mission and I'm going to take 2 years off when there's not a lot of demand. But the summer between my senior year, I had just matured physically enough. I was a real late bloomer. I was playing really, really good basketball, and I cannot tell you how many college coaches would come up to me at these big tournaments and say, hey, you're a Mormon kid, right? Yes, sir. You going to serve a mission? Yes, sir. And as soon as they heard that, they'd stick their hand out and say, we wish you the best, and they'd walk off. It didn't bother me for a while. But after enough of those scenarios happened, and some of the real schools I wanted to consider gave me that type of a conversation, I started to question whether I really wanted to go on a mission. You know, it's easy to say you want to do it until you realize you might have to sacrifice something that you really want, like playing college sports, to do it. And it was actually kind of an interesting story. I had a girlfriend, a really close friend at home. Her dad was friends with Stu Morrill, and to this point, I had heard nothing from Utah State. So it was the summer between my sophomore, junior year. Hadn't heard anything, and he said, "Hey, I called Stu for you and told him that he needs to give you a look. And Stu says that you're willing to, he'll let you come down and play." Well, nothing really came from it. I played my junior year, played pretty good my junior year. Our team we were 24-0, lost in the state semis. So
wow.
Undefeated, lost to some people remember Chris Childs that played for the Knicks. His son Jesse Child played on Bora High School. They beat us in the state semis. So that was crushing. But I was finally at a point where I was a pretty legit player and schools were coming out. Well, at that point, Stu called and said, "Hey, come down this summer and play rat ball," is what they called it, pickup ball with the guys. And so at this point, I had been told by I don't know how many coaches, "Well, you're a Mormon kid, you're going on a mission, good luck." And so I had made up my mind going down to rat ball that if Stu asked me if I was going to go on a mission, I was going to tell him no. This wasn't going to go. I played with the guys couple 2 or 3 nights. I helped with the Utah State team camp, and then got to play with the guys. And at the end of this, I think it was the 3rd day, as I was getting ready to come home, one of the assistants came down and said, "Stu would like to talk to you in his office." And so I went up to Stu's office and we had a conversation, and, he was feeling me out a little bit, and he goes, "So I want to know if you're going to go on a mission." And I had made up my mind I wasn't. And I tried to get the words to come out of my mouth that I wasn't going to go. I couldn't say it. And I still to this day, in another scenario, I had a friend tell me sometimes God will make decisions for you that you wouldn't have made yourself. And I think he did that for me here. I was full set to say I'm not going. And I sat there for a minute, couldn't get the words out. And I looked at him and said, "I'm going to go on a mission." And I didn't even want to hear myself say that, but I said it. And he kind of leaned back in his chair, and I thought, "Oh, here we go." And he goes, "Good. Because if you didn't, I wasn't going to offer you a full ride scholarship. I want a guy that believes and lives what he believes." So one thing that was really interesting about Stu is Stu had grown up a member of the church. His mom, till the day she died, was an active member. Stu had actually left the church at Rick's College at some point and had been a very inactive, member, or even removed his name as a member for the rest of, time after Rick's. But he was always very respectful of it. But I didn't know how Stu would take me going on a mission, right? Was this going to be a pro or a con? I tried to say I wasn't. God wouldn't let me say it. I said I was. And he goes, "Well, good. Because you live what you believe, I'm going to offer you a full ride." And I just felt like in that moment, God standing there saying, "Dude, trust me and I'll take care of you." And it was pretty interesting as I was overwhelmed and grateful. Utah State was one of the top schools I wanted to consider. I don't know exactly how this happened, but somehow the word got out that Stu had offered me as I left Utah State. And by the time I got home 4 or 5 hours later, I had 2 or 3 more. In the next 24 hours, I had 3 more top-tier Division I offers. I had none to that point. But as soon as Stu had made the offer, then I had a bunch. And so, long story short, I ended up committing to Utah State and coming here. But going on a mission was an easy thing until it wasn't. And then I really had to decide what was most important to me. It was scary to me to give up 2 years physically and to go on a mission and not play basketball and go and sacrifice and help other people. But Dallin, what was really interesting was I graduated at 6'6", 180. I will say this because I think this is important. This was a big life lesson for me. And my setting apart blessing for my mission, I wasn't hesitant, but I was nervous about what I'd be able to do. And my stake president, my setting apart blessing, said that if I would be a hardworking and obedient missionary, that I would be blessed with all the things physically that I needed to accomplish what I was supposed to playing basketball. That promise, I remember him saying it as clear as day. I wrote it in my journal. I've read it 1,000 times. That gave me the comfort to go and do what I needed to do because I believe God keeps his promises. And so I graduated and left my mission 6'6", 178. I came home from my mission 6'8", 235. And I was I was built like a brick house. Like I looked like a bodybuilder. I had abs and I had filled out and I looked like a man all of a sudden instead of this little boy. And I still remember, I remember walking into the Hyper one day and it was the first day back from my mission to play with the guys and I took my shirt off. And Ty Wesley looks at me and he goes, "What the hell mission did you serve?" And so it was kind of a joke for a while. But no, God, he did keep his promises, and I ended up having the physical things that I needed. Now, I thought that my career would go longer than it did. And when I got hurt my senior year, I questioned. So God promised me I'd have everything physical. And then my third game of my senior year, I had a grade 3 Liz Frank fracture, and I was done.
Yeah.
Over. And I was pissed. Because I'm like, God, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I had promises from you, and I had expectations of being done and going to play overseas or going to do something to play after. And then one day it was over. And so it took some soul searching for a while to see what God meant by I'd have everything that I needed to accomplish what I was supposed to do. Because in my mind, I wasn't ready to be done at that point. But he had different plans for me.
What are some of the things you learned on the mission that you feel like were absolutely something that you had to learn and you would not have learned in a different place?
Oh, man. The mission was, I think one of the disservices we do in the church in prepping youth for missions is we make it sound like it's this magical, incredible 2 years. And there are flecks and specks and dust particles of that. Some of the highest points of my life came on my mission. But I will never forget, I spent 9 weeks in the MTC learning Spanish, and then my first area was in Del Rio, Texas, on the border of Mexico. And so I'd been in the area for like 4 or 5 days, and it was time to do our weekly planning. And I had envisioned in my mind all of this excitement and magic of a mission. And it sucked. It was just like, it was real life. It was hard. It was, you had to wake up in the morning and minutes passed like hours and hours passed like days. And sometimes days would pass like minutes, but I'd only been in the area for like 4 days. And we sat down for this weekly planning meeting, and my companion stood up and he walked out to get something out of the kitchen. And I remember sitting there thinking, there is no way I can do this for like 22 more months. I remember there was old weights sitting in the closet. I remember this room. I remember the smells. It was a gut check moment for me. And for anyone that served a mission and done it well, if we're honest with each other, it is the hardest thing you'll ever do. It's hard. I mean, I look back at my mission now, some of the most fond memories of anything I ever did. I got to meet incredible people. I got to see the gospel. I grew up with the gospel, so I didn't know what it was like to not have it. I got to see people's lives really change because of it, and change through repentance and change through the power of Christ. I got to build a relationship with Christ that I didn't have before, but the day-to-day was hard. And so as far as lessons that I learned, I think one thing that has really driven me and helped me throughout my life is in anything that we do, to find happiness and success and to do it right, it's going to be 95% grind, suffer, sweat, cry, crawl. And then there's these bursts of like sunrises and sunsets where your efforts just seem to come together and things work out, and you get these incredible, what I'd call a payday, right? You look and look and look and look, and you finally find someone who's ready to hear the gospel, and they're one of the 100 that you teach that actually decides they want to change their life, and they make those changes, and you see that happiness. That one person makes it worth all the time before that and all the suffering before that. It's all worth it. And that's just a lesson that it pounded into my head over and over on my mission, that life as a whole is a grind, and it always will be. But if we keep working and we keep striving, those sunsets and sunrises will come, and they're worth it, as long as we don't quit and don't give up.
Was that something that helped keep, knowing that, did that help keep you anchored? Your freshman year, you came back, and you went from being a star to you were planning on redshirting, but there's somewhat of a battlefield promotion your freshman year, so you got minutes, but not many.
Yeah.
Tell me about that transition. Was that difficult?
I went from being the Gatorade Player of the Year, the 5A Player of the Year, the number one guy in the state of Idaho, being the guy, to being just another guy on a team. I'd never been in that situation in my life, and I don't want to sound prideful. I'd always been one of the go-to guys, and I came home, with all the size and weight and stuff I'd put on my mission. I did need some time to get ready physically. I wasn't ready right off the bat. So I started redshirting. And I want to say it was 15 or 16 games into the season, Modu Niang, one of our backup post players, he was by no means a big contributor, broke his hand. And I remember Stu calling me into his office and saying, hey, we're going to pull your medical red shirt and you're going to start playing. And for those that don't know what that means, if you red shirt, you get to sit a whole year and not lose a year of eligibility.
That's right.
And so it's a year to work. Well, back when I played, it's very different now, but back when I played, you could have one red shirt year and one medical red shirt year if you got hurt. And so I think that's how it was. But anyways, you could sit a year and not have it take a year of eligibility. And so that's what I was going to do. Well, then halfway through the season, a backup player gets hurt and Stu decides you're going to play. And I remember calling my dad because for me personally, it was the worst thing that could have happened as far as basketball goes. I had not sent, so it had now been 2.5 years since I had played in a game. No, 3 years. It had been almost 3 years since I'd played in a game. From the time I won the state championship to the time I went into my first collegiate game, it had been almost 3 years. And so I didn't get any of the preseason games. I didn't get any of it. I just got thrown into this whack game for my first game, and it felt like everything was on like fast forward times 2. And I remember kind of a mixed emotion in the crowd as I checked in, because back then, as soon as you played 1 minute of a game, your red shirt ability was gone. And I talked to my dad about it, and he's like, well, are you going to do what's right for you, or are you going to do what's right for your team? And I chose to do what I felt was right for the team, but to your point...
What a great advice from your dad.
It was.
Holy cow.
It was. Are you going to do what's right for you, what's right for your team? And my dad gave me, there was a couple times in my current playing career that he talked me off some edges, and that was one of them. And so I did, and I played garbage minutes, and I did a few things in a handful of games to help us win games. I do think I added some value, but not at the level that I thought I was capable of, and I blew an entire year to do it. And so, yeah, it was frustrating, but that's life.
You get better and you get better and you get better. Senior year, you have a lot of attention, especially in the media. There's articles about you. There's attention. There's excitement, especially in Cache Valley. This is such a bubble that we live in here that everybody knows like everything that's going on. Yeah. And Utah State is at the epicenter of so much of that. And so you have this season-ending injury, like 3 games into your senior season. Tell me about that. What was the transition like when you had your identity around this world of athletics is now put beyond your reach, and there's this time of transition where there's acceptance, and then there's also looking ahead. How did you handle that, seeing that this wasn't even at the end of the season? You still had to be there for your team for months and months.
It was miserable. I got, like you said, I got hurt the 3rd game. My injury was a little bit unique in the fact that when I got hurt, the doctors here didn't really know what I had. They did it's a long, I don't want to speak poorly, but it was largely misdiagnosed. They called it a midfoot sprain because they did an x-ray, the bones weren't broke, but in a Lisfranc fracture, it's not a bone breakage, it's actually the tear of a ligament that holds your midfoot together. We didn't do an MRI, so they do an x-ray the night that I get hurt. I knew something was really wrong. It just, I landed, I went to turn, I felt a pop. I'm like, I'll play through it. I went down a couple more possessions, got a rebound, and went to outlet it. And when I went to outlet, like you could hear an audible snap. Oh. And everyone around me heard it. But I hit the ground, so I came out of the game that night, went and did x-rays. Foot wasn't broken, so it's just a midfoot sprain is what we called it. So it was really frustrating because for the next probably 6 or 7, maybe even 8 weeks, they had me rehab. So I would, I'd go to practice, but I couldn't play, obviously. And so I would like ride a bike, or I would do stationary things to try and keep my cardio, because we didn't know if I was going to be out 6 weeks. We didn't know what the situation was going to be. Well, as the season kept going on, I kept rehabbing, and it kept getting worse. Like it'd get better, and then it'd get way worse. I was never able to like turn and pivot. I'm talking like running on underwater treadmills and things like that. And finally, after a couple of months, I was out of the boot, feeling like things were kind of getting better. And then one day in the training room, it just like flared up and it swelled up again. And the trainer at the time, he's like, well, we're just going to put you back in the boot. And this is not a moment I'm proud of. I lost it. Like I said every word in the book. I was so pissed off. I said, you don't know what the hell you're doing. This is obviously not what the problem is. And this wasn't his fault, but it's just, I boiled over. I didn't respond well. I said, I'm done here. And so I actually had my dad call the Jazz, and one of the Jazz trainers said, you need to go to the Tosh Specialty Hospital in Salt Lake. So I will never forget, my mom accompanied me down to the Tosh Specialty Hospital down there, and we met with this specialist, and he came in and he did x-rays, and then he did an MRI, and he walks out, and while we're waiting for the image results, we're sitting in the room, and my mom and I are talking, because at this point, my senior year is pretty well over, but what I was going to do is I was going to medical redshirt. So I was going to, because of an injury, I was now going to use that redshirt year. I was going to sit and I was going to come back and play again the following year in 2000. It would have been 12 and 13. And the doctor walks in and he sits down and he goes, "So what are your plans?" And I said, "I'm going to medical redshirt and come back and play next year." And his exact words were, "You're going to need to reconsider that." And he put the new x-ray up on the board, and my whole midfoot was no longer connected in the center. What had actually happened was I'd torn that ligament, and with all my rehab, it had caused my foot to actually separate. And so there's a joint in the middle of your foot, and mine was no longer connected. Like if you looked at my x-ray, none of my bones were touching. So they were all just kind of floating and being held together by blood and muscle and skin. And so he goes, "Well, where you've rehabbed on this for so long, this has gotten bad enough that I'm going to have to fuse your entire midfoot." And so he said, "I'm not going to tell you can't play again, but I will tell you, if I fuse this and you break the fuse, you're not playing in the driveway with your son. You're not hiking to go on a hunt. You're done." And I mean, those were his exact words. And I looked at my mom and I broke down crying, because to that point in my life, basketball had been 70% of it. It's what I'd always done. It's who I was. And as I drove home, I was so pissed off, because God had promised me if I had done my best on my mission, I'd have all the physical things. Well, how does he let me down now? Like, it's my senior year. To your point, like for my first 3 years, my first year we've talked about, my sophomore year was better. My junior year, there was actually some time where one of our starting posts had a surgery, so I got to start for 8 weeks. I was WAC player of the week. I was averaging double-doubles. I was leading the nation in rebounds per minutes. I was finally doing the things I knew I could do. But my senior year, when Ty Wesley graduated, it was my chance to actually be the guy and to really step in and play 35 minutes a game, and 3 games in, it's over. And then I'm being told I can't play again, and I was pissed. I was not happy. I was hurt. I felt like God had let me down. I felt like it's weird when your whole identity in a minute changes. And as I've matured, I've recognized in the whole big picture, this was not a real problem. It felt like it was. Sports aren't a real problem. People have their identity change overnight in ways that are real problems. A parent loses a kid. That's a real problem. They go from having 1 child or 2 or 3 to having 0 or 1 less. That's a real problem. That's an identity change overnight that's real. I felt like poor me for a while. And one day I finally woke up and I thought, okay, I'm not healthy. I was in a boot or cast for 8 months, but long term, I'm healthy. My parents have taught me my entire life that sports will end at some point. One thing my dad always said is, sports will let you down at some point. And his point was, very few athletes get to determine when they walk away. You either get cut because you're not good enough, or you get hurt. Very few get to play to the next level and at the level that they think they can get to and walk away on their own time. And he was right. And I got hurt, and I thought, this isn't what I wanted, but my parents taught me this would happen at some point, and I'm grateful that they taught me the importance of an education. As I went to Utah State, I got dual degrees in finance and economics. I got, real schooling, real education. I did well in school. And so fortunately at that position, when my basketball career ended, I had other things to look forward to. And that's because of what my parents taught me.
So tell me more about learning about identity. What was the lesson that you had to learn, that just life goes on, or count your blessings, or what was the resounding message?
The message has changed as time has gone on for me, but it got to a point where one of the things I recognized, and it's been one of the greatest lessons I've learned in my life, is that fame or worldly success lasts for a very short period of time. Not just in your life or in my life, but in everyone else's lives and the way they see you. I remember winning the state championship my senior year of high school and went home, and we were the heroes of the town. 32 years, finally won a state championship. Every sign in town was "Congrats Bruins," and every interview was us, and we were heroes. But after like 3 weeks, I remember waking up and everyone had kind of gone back to real life, and it was on to baseball, or it was on to track, like it was over. And I remember thinking, man, that was so much effort and so much work for like such a short period of excitement. And then the same thing happened at Utah State. You know, fortunately, my freshman, sophomore, junior year, we won WAC championships. We got to play in March Madness all 3 years. But I'll never forget, like, we'd win the WAC tournament or regular season or both, go to March Madness. We didn't win a March Madness game, went 0 for 3. That's a sore subject. But I'll always remember Stu at the end of that. He'd sit down like, well, boys, like, heck of a run. Time to start over. And it's like everything you worked for culminated into something so short, and then it ended, and everyone else moved on too. And so one of the things that I learned, and it's one of the greatest lessons of my life to this point, is that we look at athletes, we look at leaders, we look at people high up in business positions as the heroes. But if I asked you right now who won the Super Bowl 5 years ago, could you tell me?
I'd have to really think about it, and I still might get it wrong.
Who won the Major League Baseball playoffs, 3 years ago? Who won the gold medal in the 100-yard dash? Who was the MVP of the NBA in 2018? Surely no one's going to tell you who the Gatorade Player of the Year was in Idaho in 2006 unless it's myself or maybe my wife, because she's heard me talk about it. And I just recognize that, like, those are fleeting, quote-unquote, hero moments. But what I found was, through my Utah State experience, it had put me in a position where people wanted to get to know you. Youth wanted to get to know you because you were in the limelight. You were one of the basketball players on a great team. And because of those opportunities my wife and I got to do, we probably did 100 firesides, over the 4 years. But my point is, what I found was, if you want to be remembered and you want to be a hero, you make a difference in a person's life. If you help a person in a time of need, or you help a person when they're feeling down, or you even take a second when you're not wanting to help anyone other than yourself, but you just take a minute to hear somebody and to help them feel better, those people will never forget you. And it can be 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years later, and I can still tell you specific people in specific circumstances that in my time of need, they helped me. They're my real heroes. And I can tell you exactly what they look like. I can tell you what they were wearing that day. I can tell you the whole conversation because they changed my life. And so I just recognize, as far as identity went, that basketball, I could still try and be a blessing to people without basketball. And if I wanted to find real internal joy and like a feeling of success, it didn't come from winning championships. It came from when a little kid would come up that wanted a chance to take a picture with you, and instead of just taking a picture and sending him on his way, you sat and talked with him for 5 minutes. That was the type of stuff that was meaningful, that came because of sports. And I guess I just recognize that because sports end, you don't have to change being that kind of person to hear people and to be there for them, because those are the types of things that they'll always remember. They don't care how many points you scored or how many dunks you had on the ESPN Top 10. They couldn't care less. They got their own problems, and when people help them, that's what means something to them. Yeah,
Bo Nichols shared this in my interview with him. He said that winning and losing feel a lot the same after a certain while. He said, "Don't get me wrong, I love winning. I love it's euphoria and it's ecstasy in the moment, but before you know it, somebody else is the man, or somebody else is challenging you for the title before you've hardly had a second to soak it all in." And on the failure side, he said, as long as you're still hungry to get going and get after it, he's like, it's just the excitement comes back and the energy is there, and it's just the same thing. It's just the same thing. And what's interesting, so this takes us back to that original topic of reinventing yourself. There's this principle of giving back and gratitude and impact that really matters in the lives of people. And we really celebrate that in the lives of athletes and as you called them, heroes that we as society look up to, because they're the ones that are the standard bearers. They're the cool ones, or the smart ones, or the strong ones, or the fast ones. But most of us are not the cool, the smart, the fast, or anything. We're pretty normal. And it's those normal people in those normal moments doing extraordinary things that will make that lasting impact. And that's what all of this, that's the only thing that matters. I love how your dad taught that principle in that sports will always let you down. Like being normal is normal, you know, in the sense that we're just, to be the king of the hill is such a rare thing, but we all end up in the same place for a reason. There's got to be some wisdom in that, some wisdom that we have to learn from that. So as you've reinvented yourself in this process, you've now entered the competitive world of wealth advising. There's probably few other industries that have such quick fall off, or it's very saturated in a lot of places. So you've taken this competitive drive, this work ethic that you were raised with and cultivated throughout your life, and you're now applying this into a really competitive industry. I'm sure it might have been a little bit different then than it is now, but there's probably a lot of similarities still. I mean, you served your mission during the Great Recession, right? So so you didn't have to work through that in your career.
Yep.
But what were the lessons that really applied well that you had learned growing up that you were able to apply to this new career of yours in the finance industry?
Finance industry or any industry, if you want to be good, it comes back to what my dad would say when he came home from work and asked me about practice. If you want to be successful, you have to be willing to do things that other people won't, because everyone is going to do the required bare minimum, whatever that is. And whatever industry you're in, whether you're in medicine or you're in finance or you're in door-to-door sales, whatever it is, right? Like you look at your industry and look at the guys that make the most money and that build the biggest teams. How many hours are there to knock in a day, right? You can only knock so many hours. But then all of a sudden you hear about somebody that's willing to knock longer or later or more effectively, and they're the ones making the money. To be successful in anything, it always comes down to, are you willing to outwork the person next to you? I think work and effort is always going to be one of the number one drivers of success in anything. But I also think that the quicker we come to the reality that if you do what's right for people before you do what's right for yourself, it'll always help you in the long run. And I kind of learned that lesson. So my mission president was, we talk about how the mission blessed me. I mean, I wanted to be an eye surgeon. I was going to be an ophthalmologist, went on a mission, ended up working closely with my mission president for the last 6, 7, 8 months of my mission. He ended up being a big wealth advisor in Salt Lake. Well, long story short, he ended up being my business partner and my mentor for the last 15 years. And,
Is he still?
Well, so that's actually what's kind of funny is we had a mission reunion on Friday night. So it's been 20 years since I left my mission. And it was funny. One of my old companions comes up. He goes, "Are you really President Cutler's boss?" And I'm like, I am. So in a funny world, I came off my mission, dropped all my med, got all my finance degrees, went to work for another firm, did really well there. Then my mission president hired me. So in 2014, January 2014, I started working with him. So for the last 12 years, he's been my boss. Well, as of about...
This is at Insight.
This is
right?
Insight Group, Financial Insight Center, and then ultimately we merged with a firm called EP. Well, as of about the last 6 months, I'm now the regional director for Utah, and so I am technically my mission president's boss. And so it's kind of funny, like it's just weird, the full circle of things. But, one thing that my mission president that Chuck taught me, as he said, people are motivated by 4 things, and it almost always happens in this order. The first is we're always motivated by money. Like you want to make ends meet, you want opportunity, you want to do fun things, it's going to be money. Then it's going to be, once you've made the money, it's position. So I made the money, now I want the title. I want to be CEO, I want to be CFO, I want to be whatever it is. So you're driven first by paying your bills. You create the financial freedom. Once you've done that, the next motivation is going to be the position. You want the title. Once you have the title, you want the recognition. Now you want people to see typically, hey, he or she's made the money. They've got the position. Look at what they've done. He goes, those are almost always in that order, the first 3 motivating factors that people go through in their career. He goes, but what I find funny is the 4th. He said the 4th is, and he goes, not everyone gets to this point at any point in their career, but the people that do end up being the most successful, they actually care about the people they work for. And he goes, once a person recognizes that if they and it's not recognition. It's once they truly come for whatever reason to love the people they serve, to love their clients, to love their employees, to love the people that they're kind of over or responsible for. He said, what's fascinating is once a person's motivation turns from those first three things to actually loving the people they serve, the other three things fall into place at a much quicker pace at a much higher level. And you've interviewed people that have done that, right? I mean, they start because they want to be successful. They get a position, they're recognized, but then ultimately you're like, man, this guy or gal is so down to earth, and they're just good people, and they care about the people they love. They're always the most wildly successful people. And so, what I learned from mission and basketball and all this stuff in a career is you got to make money. Money doesn't make you happy, but it is opportunity. It does provide flexibility. It does relieve some stress. It kind of changes your problems, if you will. Money's great. You got to have it. You got to make money where you can. The positions and the recognition, we all go through that, but that's ultimately just a pride thing, right? I want people to know I'm better than them, or I've done something that they haven't. But when I look at my career in the wealth management industry, or I look at any of my clients that are wildly successful in their businesses, it's because they care about the people they work with. And I've really tried to get to a point to where, and I feel like I'm there, like when my clients come into the office, for the most part, I love seeing them. They're now more friends than they are even a client. I love hearing about their successes. I love hearing about their struggles and their challenges, because that's an opportunity for me to find a way to help. I love people and having the desire to help them and do what's right for them. I don't ever have to run behind a corner at Walmart when I see a client, or Sam's Club or Costco, because I feel bad about what I've done with their money to make me more money.
Yeah.
Don't ever have to do that. And there is such a freedom that comes when you can have as clear of a conscience as possible. When you see your end client or your end employee or whoever it is that you're serving, if you can have a conscience and see them and be excited to see them in a third party, you're doing things right. Something I've strived to do. I haven't been perfect, but I feel like I've done a decent job, and it's blessed my life, because now I've got 225 households of clients that are like friends and family, not just clients.
Yeah. So it's interesting. As we've drawn just a small arc through your career and in your life, this promise that God made you all these years ago, that if you need to go serve this mission and I will provide for you. We often hear one thing, and then we find that it actually means, thankfully, something a lot different than what we originally thought. Thomas Blackshear is a well-known Western painter. He's really famous in the Western art market, and there was a point in his career where he believed that God spoke to him and said, "I want you to make my art." And he's like, "No, I don't like Christian art. It's kind of corny. It's not my thing." He was an illustrator, and he did sweet movie posters and comics, and he worked for. He had connections with Jim Henson and the Muppets, and he had connections at LucasArts and for Star Wars, and his career was just kind of moving in all these other random directions. And he's like, he'd done painting, but he's like, I don't Christian art's not for me. And he said this feeling wouldn't leave me until one day he was talking to a friend of his who was a musician and an actor, and his friend told him, Thomas, God has been telling me to create his music. And Thomas was really interested, because he's like, this sounds familiar. His friend had no idea that he'd had these feelings. And he said, Thomas, I told God I don't want to create this music, but he wouldn't leave me alone. And so I told him, all right, I'm gonna fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And then you need to tell me what to do with these feelings, because I don't want to create Christian music for the same reasons. It's corny. It's just not my style. He said, I fasted for 3 days and 3 nights. And at the end of the third day, I knelt down in prayer, and I said, all right, God, I don't have anything. You tell me what you want me to do with these feelings. And God told him, go to bed and I'll tell you in the morning. So he went to bed, and he woke up on the 4th day. And he said to Thomas, God spoke to me and said, I want you to create my music. And I replied saying, I don't want to make Christian music. And God said, I didn't ask you to create Christian music. I asked you to create my music. And Thomas said when he heard that, it just, everything came together in his mind. And it had, he said, and then at that moment there was images that were put into my mind after that. Some of them religious, obviously, and some of them not. but that was God telling me to create his art. And it makes me, your story reminds me of that anecdote, because that was in a way of what God was telling you. I'm going to provide a way for you. And he did in a sense in basketball, but that was actually a really small sense of all of these other things that have come into your life. And I wish we had more time to go into specifics on the career through wealth advising, because you've rubbed shoulders with some pretty amazing people. You've built big teams, you've prospered and you've grown, and your hobbies, we'll call them. I mean, not hobbies is kind of a it doesn't really reflect the success or the degree at which you've really taken these, but in bodybuilding and in hunting, where you've accomplished amazing, like once in a lifetime type goals. I love that thread through your life and your story. And I think that's important to remember, because I think God says the same message to a lot of us, but it's in our own way, where I don't know if he necessarily needs to broker a deal with us, but his invitation is like, come and see what I can do with your life. I think it's better than what you think you can do with your own life. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I'm glad you bring that up in culmination of that promise and my pre-mission setting apart blessing, and how frustrated and angry I was at God when I got hurt. Now I look at it, that's now been 15 years ago that I got hurt.
Yeah.
That injury was probably one of the single greatest blessings of my life. And when I look at what God did and the way that it's worked, my promise was I'd have everything physical I needed to accomplish what I needed to do. Well, I go back and look at what happened. I had a couple of years, but I had enough bursts of excitement that I was kind of a fan favorite. And I had some big games and played really good and had some big moments. I had a following of people that respected and liked me. And then I look at what my injury did. Well, had I been hurt at the end of my senior year, or had I not even been hurt and not made it to the next level, when I got hurt that third game, every newspaper article in Cache Valley for the next 6 weeks had something to do about my injury and my update. And it just kept me, as silly as it sounds, on the forefront of people's mind. And then when I couldn't come back and play, there was like this huge letdown, because all the articles had been like, oh, he's coming back, and then he's not. And,
yeah.
And I hate to say this, but that almost created like a oh, I feel bad for Brady, and I feel bad for his family and whatever else. Well, in wealth management, the way I went through this business, I started with a book of $0 of assets. I didn't go work for somebody as a junior advisor. I didn't go and work under someone's book. I walked into nothing, like 0 clients, 0 people to work with. And so the way I built my business is I went through lists of people that I knew and I started calling them. And it was interesting, like, because of the way everything had played out and all the media attention and everything else, like when I would call and say, hey, this is Brady Jardine at the time with Allegiance Financial Partners, that's where I started. And I said, I'd love to come talk to you about your finance. And they'd always stop me and be like, wait, is this like the Brady Jardine, the USU basketball player? Yeah, it's me. Oh, man, I'm so sorry about your foot. That's such a bad deal. I can't imagine how hard that is. And I'd be like, yeah, I know, I appreciate it, but I'd love to come talk to you about your finance. We'll talk to you any day. When do you want to come? And like, if anyone's listening to this that's in the wealth management business, that is not how cold calling goes normally. Normally you have to call 1,000 people to get 15 or 20 meetings, right? You got to knock doors all day to get 5 or 6 people that'll even listen to you.
Absolutely.
And I mean, honestly, because of the way things worked, I was able, when I first got in the financial services business, I told myself, if I can manage $100 million of assets, then I will have arrived, I will have made it, and I will be able to do what I want to do in my life. And because of the way things played out, I was incredibly blessed. I did work really hard, but God helped me. Some great people in the community helped me. I mean, my book of business now is pushing north. I mean, I'll surpass $1 billion in personal assets that I manage in the next probably 12 or 18 months. And, I look at that, that's 10 times, as I sit right now, I'm 7, 8 times what I thought I would love to be at some point in my career to quote unquote have arrived. I'm a partner now in a top 10, top 15 firm in the United States. We manage almost $45 billion of assets. Berkshire Hathaway is one of our largest single shareholders. Like, it's a big deal. It's exciting. But every step along the way, God has steered me from being an eye surgeon to thinking I was going to play professional basketball, to letting things work the way they needed to allowing me to get hurt, even though I was not happy at the time. That forced me to jumpstart into my current business now. I think a lot. Had I not got hurt, I would have gone to Europe and played for a long time. But what happens there is you go over there for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and yeah, you make some money, but you come home and the stardom and the excitement of who you are is dead. It's gone because people have moved on to the next. Now it's Sam Merrill and it's Mason Falslev, and rightfully so, it should be. But that iron being hot only lasts for so long. So I guess my point of all of this is I look back in the last 15 years and I'm just incredibly grateful. I've worked really hard, but God has continued to put me in positions where the bumper rails are up. This analogy kind of clicked for me a couple weeks ago in a church talk I was giving. I've got young kids and we go bowling. And bowling's so frustrating for young kids because they can't get the ball down the middle of the lane. They never hit any pins, and after 6 or 7 gutter balls, they don't want to play anymore. So what did we do? Well, we created as a people those bumpers that can pop up when it's their turn. Well, what do the bumpers do? Well, it doesn't make the kid's ability to throw the ball any better. It just keeps the ball bouncing down the lane to get to the pins. And they might hit 1 or they might hit 8, but the point is it hits the pins. And this analogy of bowling and bumpers to me connected when I started to recognize that no matter how good the bumpers are, they do nothing unless the ball's moving. And that's our responsibility. Our responsibility as people, sons and daughters of God, is to keep our feet moving, keep our drive going, and keep doing the best that we can. And as long as we are moving down the lane, God's bumpers, he's going to let us bounce around and make stupid mistakes and make errors and do dumb things, but he's going to keep us in the direction that we need to get to. And that's one of my greatest testimonies, is that he's aware of us. He knows where we need to end up. And if we're willing to just try, he'll let us bounce all over the rails, but ultimately we're going to get to the pins. And that's happened for me in my life, and I'm sure it'll continue to happen. I'm guessing in 15 years from now, I'll look and say, man, in 2026, I thought I had things figured out. Now look at where I'm at. And it might be better, it might be worse, but for the big picture, it'll be what I need. So God's in charge. We just have to put the effort so that he can steer us. If he pops the bumpers up and we set the bowling ball down at the lane and go sit down at the seats and let the ball sit there, he can't help.
It's true. It's totally true. It is worth noting that your career and your achievements are far from over. But that principle will still resonate through your life throughout the years, I'm sure. Considering all of this amazing trajectory, this amazing life that you've been able to live, I want to ask you the same question that I ask all of my guests at the end. And that question is this: what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
Well, there's a lot, but one of the great life lessons that I'll never forget was my wife and I lived in Hyde Park. We had a couple of young kids at the time. I was in the early stages of my business, and life was stressful. I was working 60, 70 hours a week. We were surviving with young babies that weren't sleeping. We were just tired. And I had a pair of brown work shoes, brown dress shoes. And I'd had them for a year or so, and they were getting worn because I wore them every day, and my shoelaces were broke. And it was embarrassing. In wealth management, I'm walking into appointments with shoelaces that kept breaking, and so I kept tying like knots, and so the shoelaces were only going like, halfway up my shoe by this point, but they still worked, and I was still getting things done. Well, one day I came home from work, and those brown shoes were sitting on the table, polished with new shoelaces. And I went up to my wife, and I thanked her, and I said, "Thank you for doing that." She said, "I didn't do it." What had happened was one of the members of the ward who lived on our street was in a meeting with me on that Sunday and had seen my shoes and had seen where they were at and took it upon himself when I was at work to walk over to my house and to ask my wife for my shoes, as embarrassing or as weird as that must have sounded. And he took the shoes and he polished them and he put new shoelaces in. And I've had a lot of people do incredibly nice things for me, but that was just something that it was such an incredible example of just Christ-like love They saw a need. The need wasn't life-changing, but they knew what our situation was. He was willing, Brother Stevens is his name, was willing to get out of his comfort zone and go knock on our door and ask my wife for my shoes, and then took them and put time and effort into polishing and replacing the shoelaces. And I think the reason it's so powerful to me, and it's something that has always stuck in my mind, is because it's a small thing. But it was something that at the time felt like God himself was saying, I got you. And you mentioned it earlier, some of us get the chance to maybe be in the limelight or do some real big athletic things or business things, and others don't. But it comes back to my point in saying, if we want to be a hero or if you want to change someone's life, it's all we have to do that is look and pray for opportunities to help an individual. And it doesn't have to be something big or grandiose. It can be something small, like seeing they need their shoes polished and doing it. And I look at the world today, and we're cold, we're hard, we're judgmental, we're mean, we're polarized. And honestly, like small things, just small and simple things bring great things to pass. And so, my invitation to people listening, and it's something I'm setting goals for myself every day, is I'm praying for just small opportunities to find ways to help and to let people feel loved. And when you ask the nicest thing someone's ever done, that's what comes to mind. I've had people do things for me that cost lots of money and took even more effort, but for whatever reason, that small, simple thing in a time of need taught me a life lesson.
Yeah, when you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God.
For sure.
Thank you for sharing that story, and thank you for your time. I think
good
this
to be
is
with
a
you
good
today.
place to end.
Yeah, thanks, man.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast on Instagram at the handle Momentum Theory Pod, where I'll be announcing new episodes weekly, as well as sharing my top takeaways from every conversation. As always, I invite you to please share this episode with anyone you think could benefit from the conversation. So long for now, and thank you for tuning in.